Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. A knife attack by 8 assailants left 29 dead at a train station in southwest China last month. It's an event that's likely to have serious implications for Chinese Uyghur Muslims. The Chinese authorities have blamed the terror attack on Uyghur separatists from the Xinjiang region. This may pave the way for even greater restrictions on the Uyghur population. They are already subject to security checks on a routine basis. The arrest of prominent academic Imam Tohti last month under charges of fomenting separatism has been condemned by the international community. So what is behind the repressive actions of the Chinese government? And are the Uyghurs really a threat to Chinese state security? Here to discuss with me in the studio is Enver Tohti Bugda, independent researcher, Rod Wai, who's an Associate Fellow at the Asia Programme of Chatham House, and joining us on Skype is Nicholas Belquin, Senior Researcher from the Human Rights Watch organisation, and on the phone we have Stephanie Gordon, PhD candidate at the University of Leicester. But first, let's take a look at this report.
Chinese soldiers out in force following the deadly attack at Kunming Station. For the Chinese government, the attack has heightened the need to clamp down on the perceived internal threat of Uyghur Muslims, something that human rights groups claim is leading to widespread institutional discrimination against the Uyghur community. The attack at Kunming Station 2 weeks ago has left almost 30 people dead and over 130 people injured, after 8 people dressed in black walked onto the station and attacked commuters indiscriminately with knives and meat cleavers. Government officials have stated that 3 of the group have been captured and a further 4 were shot dead by the police. Aside from official government sources, there has been little information released about the aims and intentions of the attackers, other than that they are Uyghur in origin. While the Chinese government has downplayed all suggestions that the attack was based on ethnicity, officials have been quick to link the attack with interference from foreign extremist groups, implicating Islamic fundamentalist groups in particular.
But behind a series of separatist activities, there have always been foreign forces committing crimes, foreign forces seeking to advance them. This does not exclude the provocations and hype of people from outside China, people with ulterior motives, people who are unwilling to see a united and strong China, led by a socialist communist party. We will remain on high alert for this.
In Kunming and across southwest China, security checks and interrogations of migrant Uyghurs have increased dramatically. Many Uyghurs feel that the discrimination has nothing to do with national security.
I alone have already been checked 3 times. The police point their guns at us. What can we do? We don't know what really happened. Either we feel very unsafe ourselves.
Uyghur Muslims historically lived in Xinjiang province in western China, but have seen the steady erosion of their position in the region, firstly by the growth of the ethnic Han Chinese population, and then by increasingly restrictive curbs on the Uyghurs' cultural and religious practices. In 2009, tensions between the 2 ethnic groups bubbled over into riots in the country's regional capital, Yunkwai, where 200 people died and almost 2,000 were injured. At the time, the Chinese government blamed prominent leaders of the Uyghur community for inciting the violence. This included the academic and Uyghur activist Ilham Tohti, who was championing the rights of Xinjiang province's large Uyghur minority. In January of this year, he was arrested by the Chinese authorities and later formally charged with separatism. His wife feels that he is unlikely to receive a fair trial and could face the death penalty.
I oppose this because my husband has never done anything like this. He's just an ethnic Uyghur academic. He's a university professor. He's never done anything like the crime of separatism that they accused him of. I don't even know why it's this way. He's unlikely to receive a fair trial and could face the death penalty.
While exiled Uyghur activists say much of the violence is provoked by heavy-handed policing, the Chinese government maintains that they are acting within the rule of law. Meanwhile, the restrictions put in place against the Uyghur community look set to increase. Nathaniel Amos Sansom, Islam Channel.
So, Enver, do you think that there will be an immediate kind of crackdown on or further worsening of the situation for Uyghur Muslims?
What we can see from this incident in Kunming, it is some kind of continuation of that violence taking place in China, and which is, as a Uyghur myself, I don't see that it's really Uyghur. For example, I can sense this out. This is not something like Uyghur should do. And if we look at these things from a different angle, for example, if we ask one question, who benefited? Then we will find the answer, because Uyghur people, they know there's a vast majority of Han Chinese, they're outnumbered, and you cannot rise up and against this huge number of Chinese with that primitive weapon. So, who is behind this? Are we so stupid to damage our reputation among Han Chinese? No, we don't want to do that. We want to live side by side with anyone who respects us and treat us fairly. That is to say, the only beneficial one from this that is Chinese regime, because they want to alter your attention from the ruling crisis.
So, Rod, irrespective of who did it and why, and we're not really in a position to judge that, will the effect be a crackdown or a further worsening of the security situation as far as the Uyghur Chinese are concerned?
I suspect that it will. The Chinese narrative is that these kind of acts are perpetrated by separatist terrorists. And although we know very little of what the real facts are, I think for the Chinese authorities, this particular act was particularly worrying because it was the first large-scale attack of this nature outside the autonomous region of Xinjiang itself. So this might be, for them, evidence of potential spreading of this problem more widely throughout China, in which case their normal reaction to this kind of fear is to intensify their cracking down on preventing these kind of things happening. And I think we are likely to see life more difficult for the Uyghur population, both in Xinjiang itself and probably especially in China more broadly, where there are many Uyghurs in all parts of China.
Nicholas, let me bring you into the conversation now. What's Human Rights Watch's take on the situation as it's faced now by the Uyghur Muslims?
Well, the situation for Uyghurs in China is very bad and has been bad for many years. In recent years, we've seen increased controls and restrictions on religious expression, cultural expression. We've seen a vast and very powerful economic transformation in Xinjiang at the behest of the central government that are marginalizing and excluding the Uyghur population. And we've seen really a lot of intensification of the ethnic polarization between Uyghur and Chinese Han living in Xinjiang and elsewhere. So there is absolutely no doubt that China has been conducting a very thorough and brutal repression of the Uyghur people for many years. It's done so under various pretexts and justifications, and since the 9/11 has been using terrorism, religious extremism, and separatism as the main sort of targets, and what he says is the source of political violence in Xinjiang, which is attested, and therefore a justification for broad denial of rights on the entire Uyghur population. I think we have to keep in mind that there is a lot of political violence in Xinjiang, that it has been going up, that internet and the communication revolution has now enables very disenfranchised and very unhappy young Uyghurs to access radical Islamic discourse and theoretical justification for violence, which they did not have before. And I fear that we're going to see both more violence and more repression in the coming years.
Okay. Stephanie Gordon, you're about to head out there. Do you expect to find a situation which is markedly more tense now after this attack?
Definitely. As with any terrorist attack in any country, there is always a backlash and the creation of stereotypes which fuel poor policies based on really appeasing public opinion. My feeling is that this is, if we look at the 2009 attack, we can see there was an intensification of the sort of crackdown on Uyghurs, especially within Xinjiang. And as Nicola said, we'll probably see more of that throughout the country. But at the same time, we did see political changes coming from this, such as the replacement of Wang Le-guang with Zhang Chunqian. So it could be that it sort of shakes up the government's perception, and it could, looking at it in a positive light, encourage them to move away from this sort of trying to bring in Uyghurs with economic development. It could shake them into reforming policies which might bring them on side. So it's hard to say at this point. Obviously, it's easy to be negative, but it is possible that something good will come from this.
Rod, what's your take on that? Because I mean, the official that we had in the clip at the beginning of the programme was wheeling out rhetoric which we've heard it from starting off with George Bush and Tony Blair, President Assad, the current regime in Egypt. Practically anybody that doesn't like an internal opposition wheels this stuff out.
Yes. We always get a hard line from that particular gentleman. I mean, he's the sort of spokesman of the tougher line. And as far as the events of 2009 were concerned, they did result in the dismissal of the former party boss of Xinjiang, Wang Le-chuan, as Stephanie said, who had been a very old-style ruler. I am the law in Dodge City. He was a tough, no-nonsense man, absolutely no nonsense. And he was replaced by a man, Zhang Chunqian, who seemed to be coming in with a brief to take a rather more laid-back approach, if you like, not quite so, not oppression first and then everything else follows from that. And there was a big meeting in Beijing in late last year where, again, that policy seemed to be slightly modified, that they were going to put more emphasis on security and stability in the region and perhaps put the economic development to a sort of secondary place. But I think the big Chinese mistake has always been to see the whole problem in that region as manageable or solvable in two ways. One is as a security problem, that you deal with it as a security problem. You cannot afford to be relaxed. It is in a wider international context now, so you can even less afford to be relaxed. But the other way of dealing with it is to bring modernization, economic modernization, which benefits the whole of China because they can exploit the resources in Xinjiang, and it benefits, according to the Chinese story, the people of Xinjiang. What they miss is the cultural, political, religious side of things, which they are hugely intolerant of, and the benefits of economic modernization have tended to go more to the incoming Han Chinese than to the local indigenous population.
So Enver, is that your take on it? That there's one long-standing story about industrialization, which is that it's a rising tide that lifts all ships. There's another story which says that it exacerbates and fuels already existing and indeed creates new tensions.
I don't really think there is tension between Uyghur people and Han Chinese living in Xinjiang. And before the communist Chinese come to Xinjiang, they lived side by side, and so with no big problem. And what is happening after that is that the picture Chinese government presented to the world is quite slightly different with that real picture. Because the picture they presented to the world is saying, look, we are developing the West, we are making the huge investment here, we are making more jobs here, and those people are still not happy. But what we see is that when Chinese government, they invest money in Xinjiang, the company who's going to that job, it is also coming from China, inner China. And this company, for example, if it's coming from the Henan, and this company will bring his own worker from Henan. Then when they come to Xinjiang, they buy off the local farmer's land, and this farmer will have nothing to do. We are left away because the people going to work in this development project is Han Chinese. And in this case, Uyghur people, they felt that you are making money, come to my land. And me now, it's becoming stranger in my own land. what's going on. This is
Okay, well,
we
let
don't
me
want.
ask Stephanie about that. Do you read the economic development that way? Do you think that it's now something which is driving and exacerbating these tensions rather than, as perhaps the Chinese government might have it, ameliorating them?
Definitely, I couldn't agree more. And I think that this has been a sort of massive mistake on the Chinese part of the Chinese government, because they really have seen economic development as central to their policy in the whole of China, and they've tried to replicate this in Xinjiang, and it's really not effective. And when you put that in context with the land reforms, which again you have going on all around the country, this kind of appropriation of land, and then it obviously doesn't work in Xinjiang when people feel as though they're being pushed out of their own sort of cultural homeland, especially when you couple that with the influx of Han Chinese dramatically. So economic development certainly has had huge implications for the demographics of the region and the economic disparity between the Han and the Uyghurs.
Okay, Nicholas, I mean, if we're talking about human rights and civil liberties here, it sounds as if what's happening is coming at the end of quite a long cause, a series of causes here. What do you think can be done about it at the sharp end if there's this much kind of social weight developing behind what's happening?
Well, I think that many Uyghurs, from the Uyghur perspective, what they're witnessing is the process of colonization. The Chinese state is making Xinjiang safe for the Han, is transforming their homeland, and is pushing them to the sidelines. And this is creating a lot of grievances among the Uyghur people. And I think that China, Beijing, knows perfectly well that their policies are not really do not intend to benefit Uyghur population, or at least Uyghur population as it is now. And the choice that is presented to Uyghurs is, either you come on board and you become Chinese and you live in a Chinese-style city and you receive an education in Chinese and you leave your religion and cultural practices behind, or you're going to be seen by the state as suspect and you're not going to be able to benefit from any kind of economic development. The human rights situation in Xinjiang is really stark. We're talking about endemic torture, disappearances, arrest, repression through law, very, very little space for religious activities. And more than that, you have extraordinary, powerful drive to reshape the form of traditional Uyghur cities and settlements. In the next few years, hundreds of thousands of Uyghur homes are going to be destroyed to make way for what the Chinese government calls new socialist villages, with sort of modern-looking buildings. And this completely destroys traditional ties between the communities. And
okay,
anyone
Nicholas,
who speaks about...
I'm just going to have to stop you there because we're just coming towards the break. But we will be back looking at this question in more detail after that break, so do rejoin us.